So in the interest of time and maximizing our time together and your time with these innovative thinkers, I think we should skip the formal bios, and we'll really use a storytelling approach, which is, appropriate for this setting. And you have all their formal bios, and I can say that they're all interesting and accomplished in all sorts of ways. So I want to start first with Kristen, who is the Global Director of Mobile Alliance for Maternal Health, also known as MAMA. Kristen, first tell us what's the best Twitter handle to share insights from you.
Sure, it's at Mama Global.
Great, and do you want to talk a little bit about Mama Global and what
Sure.
you're here to talk about?
So MAMA is a public-private partnership that was launched 2 years ago by Secretary of State Clinton. We have USAID, Johnson & Johnson, the United Nations Foundation, the M Health Alliance, and Baby Center as our global partners. And we were developed to really use the power of the mobile phones that are literally at every edge of the globe to get vital healthcare information directly into the palms of women who need it the most. Maternal and infant mortality rates are getting better, but they are still staggering. And the effects of a maternal death on the entire community and in turn on the world are very impactful. So just think for a moment, if you're a woman living in Bangladesh, for example, and you're a woman living in poverty in the slums of Bangladesh, you have no real way to get information about pregnancy. You find that you're pregnant, you maybe have your mother-in-law who's giving you cultural myths and information that she knew from 40 years ago or 60 years ago. You are probably not literate and you're not able to access the internet. If there is a clinic nearby that you can go to, that clinic is likely staffed by somebody who probably doesn't have access to really up-to-date global health information and is probably semi-literate themselves. So then imagine for a moment that the mobile phone that's already in your home, you can sign up for a service and be able to start to get information based on the stage of your pregnancy or the age of your young child that's delivered to you on a regular basis in your language and with your cultural context. That transforms your life, and it transformed the life of your family and of your community around you. So we've got a quick clip here to show you about a woman named Asha Rani, who is a woman that I've met with, been to her home in the slums of Bangladesh, slums of Dhaka, and she speaks a little bit about how the MAMA messages have impacted her world.
ছেলের বয়স 9 বছর আর মেয়ের বয়স মাত্র 1 বছর। মানে সবাই আমরা আর কি এখানে আছি, যার ছেলে মেয়ে। তা এই জন্য আমি তারপরে 9 বছর পরে আমার এই মেয়ে নিচ্ছি। এটা আমার বড় বাবুর বাচ্চা দিয়ে বলতেছি। আমার যখন প্রথম বাচ্চা হলো তখন আমি কিছুই এসব জানতাম না যে বাচ্চাকে কীভাবে লালন পালন করতে হবে, কি খাওয়াতে হবে, কত মাস পর্যন্ত বুকের দুধ খাওয়াতে হবে আমি জানতাম না। এগুলো আমি জানিনি, সেই জন্য আমার বাচ্চাকে অনেক হাসপাতালে ডাক্তারের কাছে সবসময় ওষুধ লেগেই থাকতো। কিন্তু তখন আমি জানিনি যে এভাবে 6 মাস পর্যন্ত বুকে দুধ খাইতে হয় বা একটু পানিও খাওয়াতে হয় না এর মাঝে। এটা সবচেয়ে ভালো লাগছে যে বাচ্চাকে যখন বাচ্চা একটু বড় হবে 6 মাস বা 3 মাস হবে বাচ্চা, তখন বাচ্চার চোখে চোখ রেখে কথা বলতে হবে। এটা অবশ্য জানতাম না যে বাচ্চা চোখে চোখ রেখে কথা বলতে হবে, বাচ্চার কথা বাচ্চা ওইভাবে শিখে। মেসেজগুলো পড়ে আমার স্বামী আমাকে খুব উৎসাহিত করে যে এভাবে করো এভাবে করো। ও পড়ে মেসেজগুলো, আমার শাশুড়ি ওইভাবেই এখন অনেকটা করে যেভাবে এইভাবে বাচ্চারা কর, এভাবে এই সব কিছু যত্ন করে এভাবে খাওয়া, এভাবে করা। আমার পরিবারের সবাই মেসেজ পেয়ে সবাই আমার বাচ্চারা খুব যত্ন করে, ওইভাবে আর কি করে মেসেজ যেভাবে আসে ওইভাবে মেসেজ সবাই আর কি ওইভাবে যত্ন করে বাচ্চারা। এখানে আমার ডাক্তারের কাছে যেতে হয়, স্বাস্থ্যকর্মীর কাছে যেতে হয়, যে জানতে হয়। এখন আমার তা হয় না, আমি মেসেজের মাধ্যমে ঘরে বসে পাইতেছি সেবাগুলো। খাবার তারপরে স্বাস্থ্য সব কিছু এভাবে আমি দেখছি মেসেজের মাধ্যমে আর কি সব কিছু পেয়ে ওভাবে আমি লালন পালন করছি।
Wow, that's incredible. 20 million moms. And shortly we'll go into the approach that you take to reach these 20 million moms in all the different locations and how important it is to think about each of those locations. Now I want to go to Michelle Burt, who is the co-president of Games for Change. Games for Change is really one of the leading entities out there thinking about how we can combine the power of socializing online and the power of gaming to create change. Michelle?
Sure. So Games for Change is a nonprofit. I don't know how many, if anybody here ever heard of Games for Change? Okay, a few of you. So our mission is really about catalyzing social impact through digital games. The organization was founded in 2004. We are a small but nimble team, hopefully. I think probably most relevant for the audience here is going to be a project that we are executive producers on called Half the Sky. I want to see Joanna. Wow. Called Half the Sky. It's a book that was written by Nicholas Kristof and Cheryl Wudun. Nicholas Kristof, for those of you who aren't familiar, is the New York Times op-ed columnist, and he writes about a lot of global health issues. Anyway, in 2009, Nicholas Kristof had the idea as a journalist that he wanted to make a game. He'd never played games, he didn't know anything about games. All he had was this notion that, you know, he knew how many people he could reach with his column, and that his column made a real difference. So when Nick writes about things, people actually will send donations. They suddenly organizations go from not being on the radar to suddenly, you know, doing, you know, getting other kinds of media and getting visibility. He came to Games for Change because basically there's a lot of people who are interested in this power of games. Yet, a lot of people who are excited by the power of games, don't play games, have never made games, and making games is actually really incredibly complicated. And I won't pretend that I know how, I don't know how, but I do know that the organization has a wealth of knowledge in terms of how you translate the ideas of what you're trying to change in terms of behavior or communications, and how you actually can make that work in the context of a game. So the project I'm going to show you a little bit is called Half the Sky Movement, the game. It's a game on Facebook. It launched March 4. There's a couple things, I think, in terms of takeaway that's really relevant to those of you maybe who are filmmakers who are thinking about how do you engage your network, and if you're working in sort of social justice issues, I think the model of how people work on a social network is actually kind of interesting. So the game launched March 4. It's on Facebook, and you might. So one of the things that, you know, Games for Change would contribute to somebody like Nick and Cheryl wanting to make a game is to help them identify, well, what is the platform that makes sense for your game. So the reality is they wanted to reach people who didn't know necessarily about women and girls issues, or didn't care a lot deeply about these issues. That meant we were going to make a game on a social network, Facebook. 300 million people, unique people, play games on Facebook every single month. That's why this game is on Facebook. So that, you know, the audience is really about finding people on Facebook who have not thought about these issues. You'll see it's dealing with things like sex trafficking, fistula, you know, topics that one might think were not friendly towards being in a game. But hopefully you can check it out, and maybe we can show the clip.
Great.
Join the global movement to empower women and girls. Inspired by the #1 New York Times best-selling book, Half the Sky, by journalist Nicholas Kristof and Cheryl Wudun.
And I wanted to galvanize people into action.
And they did, through an acclaimed TV series and now an adventure game on Facebook. Supported by the world's leading organizations, including the Ford Foundation, Zynga.org, and Intel, play a groundbreaking game and make a real-world impact. Recruit your friends and unlock donations such as free books and life-saving surgeries. Give back while having fun.
Because we know it takes a world to bring about this change.
Half the Sky Movement, the game, coming March 4th on Facebook.
So maybe we can talk about what's relevant after.
Yeah, great. I love the hashtag, half the game, half the sky. And then, last but not least, Lena Srivastava, who is the founder of Transmedia Activism, and she kind of brings it all together. And her work is looking at what the action is and what is the best approach to achieve that action through the media. So putting the action at the center of the media. So do you want to expand on that?
Sure. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me on the panel. So I am a social innovation strategist in New York, and I run a consultancy here that's sort of a distributed talent network around the world. And what we do is we look at the intersection between creative media, technology, design, and social action, particularly in the realms of human rights and global development, and looking sort of squarely at that question of access, and how do people get access to projects, initiatives, policies, and how do you use story to do that? So the reason I'm sort of committed to something like transmedia storytelling, how many people know what transmedia storytelling is? Okay, no, okay, so we'll get into that when we start talking. I'll sort of give you a definition, and so will Michelle. We'll talk about it, but it's very, very quickly, it is participatory, immersive, and multiple channel, right, where a story is extended over a number of different platforms and creates entry points for a number of people. And the participation is why I'm so attracted to it in terms of social action, making sure that people who are quote unquote on the ground or communities that are affected by the policies that we all sort of put into place, how their stories provide the human face about the human cost. So I work on one side with institutions like UNESCO, UNICEF, the World Bank. On the other hand, I also work with individual filmmakers, artists, I've worked with dancers and choreographers, sort of looking at how you bring story and the storytelling technologies to bear on moving the needle forward in terms of actual, concrete, on-the-ground action. And I think I'm going to be talking about two projects. There are a number of them, but I'm going to be talking about two projects. I think we're going to show a clip for one of them, which is a project called Who is Diane Cristal? It is a documentary that debuted opening night of Sundance, this past Sundance in January. It comes out of a series of short films and a website that was started 4 years ago. And the story for the film came about 2 years ago. But I'm going to show you a trailer for the first set of films, which were 4 short films made by Gael Garcia Bernal and Mark Silver with Amnesty International. So you want to roll that clip?
Thank you for telling us.
Es gente que tiene una meta muy clara, pero que siento que si nosotros estuviéramos en esa situación, siento que hubiéramos renunciado hace rato. Me contagio de su fuerza y de sus ganas de seguir adelante.
Algunos que van de sus países porque quieren encontrar un mejor futuro, pero en vez de encontrar un mejor futuro encuentra uno cosas que no espera uno encontrar.
Que me dio la impresión de que como un animalito lo hubieran jalado con ese alambre y lo fueron a meter ahí como cualquier perro.
Lo sacan, lo hacen pedazos y luego en un tambo de 200 litros de diésel lo ponen a calentar y ahí lo meten.
Y me dicen, máteme, déjeme que me dé sangre. Le ponen una cubeta en el hospital y le ponen las 2 piernitas que escurrieran ahí. Y no, le digo, no, se va a morir, se va a desangrar. Entonces yo vengo y la subo y me dice, deje que me dé sangre, deje que me muera.
So as you can tell, this, the platform is around the question of migration from Central America through Mexico and up over the US-Mexico border. And so we've been spending 4 years looking at how you tie these stories of these migrants. This is a trailer, and there are 4 short films that are free to stream on Amnesty International's YouTube channel. So you can find those. But there are just a series of assets looking at how we map the system that these migrants move through and how we sort of move the needle forward on their conditions in migration, immigration, and human rights. And I forgot, you wanted us to give us your Twitter handles, right? So I tweet a lot. So if you want to follow me, it's LKSRIV is my Twitter handle.
And Michelle, did you?
Well, for the organization, it's at G4C.
And I'm at Stacey Martinet, and you can also tweet at Mashable Events, which we'll be using to share out some pieces of information from this. So a little bit about why I'm here very quickly is Mashable has been working with the UN Foundation and actually the 92Y for many years to put on something called the Social Good Summit, which is supporting this event today. And I think this is an interesting but also indicative partnership of the work that we're seeing across these different projects, which is public-private partnerships, individual partnerships, and really as new technologies are disrupting the way that funding and distribution is changing, these are necessary. So I think I'd like to start with that and talk about new forms of partnerships, what's working, what's really worked well for you, any advice you have for the audience as they think about getting their projects moved along. So, jump on in.
Do you want to go?
Well, sure. So we've got partnerships at our global level and then in our country programs, which are currently Bangladesh, South Africa, and India. So at the global level, I would say it's been a huge challenge to bring together the 5 partners that we have. It's been very much, there's different cultural differences, there's different agendas, different assumptions that come to the table. So it's really important to kind of get all those out and work those through as you're really working through the partnership. And on the other hand, it's been absolutely worth it. We've been able to scale and impact and really leverage the assets and the resources, the skills that each of these organizations bring to the table. And then we're finding that the similar kinds of things are happening at our country levels. They have partnerships with their ministries of health, with their local corporations. We have implementing partners that are social entrepreneurs in each of our countries. And again, it's like they're facing the same kinds of things of needing to get those kind of agreements, the assumptions, and really understanding what each party brings to it. And then you can realize this exponential power when you have these different parties at the table and you can work through what they're each bringing and what they're each expecting.
Is it possible to put a slide up? Because I think there's something I can share. Just in terms of the content creators, the Half the Sky project, it is a multi-platform project. So I mentioned there was a book. There is a social media campaign that's actually been quite successful. That leveraged off the PBS broadcast over 2 nights in October. This Facebook game just launched in March. And kind of baked into this idea of the movement and the project is really the support of some very specific organizations working on the ground in women and girls issues. And just thinking from a content creator point of view, there was a book which was put out by Random House. There was PBS, which those of you who work with public television understand there's some restrictions around how much you can actually do from an activist point of view. You can't raise money for organizations. There's certain things you can't do with public funding. The game, and because we're a nonprofit, was really going to be that arm that could allow for direct donations. So part of, I think, what's interesting about thinking about partnerships, and I'm going to show you, hopefully if I can do 2 things at once. Oh, I should mention that these multi-platform projects are kind of complicated in terms of how you raise your money and how people have their various agendas and understanding what that agenda might be, both in terms of what it looks like in the US and actually what it looks like in the implementing partners on the ground in country if you're working on women and girls issues in particular. So one of the things, the Half the Sky broadcast had about, the book had probably like 40 or so nonprofit partners. And basically, if you went to the back of the book, Nick and Cheryl were familiar with a number of organizations. They kind of called them out in the back and as sort of organizations you might want to get involved with if you cared about the issues in the book. The broadcast had another group, sort of slightly smaller. The game, the Facebook game, had 7. And the reason we had 7 is because we were relying on our partners to also be content experts. So if Games for Change was really trying to marry this idea of activism and action and engagement, the organization and the game studio that we hired are not experts by any stretch of the imagination in the issues related to women and girls. That meant that we had to up our learning curve really, really quickly, and we had to really rely on and listen to the input of, at a content level of our partners, particularly if we wanted them to feel good and to feel happy about this project as it was going out to market. So those are the partners in the game. You can give money to them. They're part of the quests in the game. Just to give you a quick sense of when you take partnership to a really sophisticated level, Room to Read is a genius organization. Their goal is about stopping illiteracy, and they're working in India and working in a number of different countries. One of the things we put together as part of the game is Room to Read raised money from the Pearson Foundation because they wanted to figure out a way, we're looking at this Facebook game as a way of being active engagement. So when you show up to play this game, in the first 15, 20 minutes that you're playing the game, you're actually participating in the actual donation of a book, a real book, to a real young person through a Room to Read program. So there was $250,000 raised, not that went to the production of the game, not that went to Games for Change, that went entirely as part of the story, let's say, of how you, people who might want to play this game, could be part of it without spending any money. That feels really, really powerful. But when you think about it, it's $250,000. We're trying to raise money to make this game. Here's this great story, no money for the game. Therein go your kind of partnerships. So just to share quickly, for us, partnership meant content integration. It also meant that we were raising money for people. So our noble idea of, we're going to raise money and there'll be quests and we'll just give this money to people because the players will determine how much money they want to give. Well, when we got to the conversation with World Vision, a very large, substantial organization, their general counsel got on the phone with me and said, and are you able to raise money? Is that your job? Is that your mission? And we're like, no. How do you plan on raising money, in the 50 states for our organization and giving us money? Where's the transparency? Where's this? Where's that? And they started asking a lot of incredibly hard, difficult questions, which we didn't have the answer to. We didn't want to have the answer to. Enter into our new partnership with Tides Foundation. So the game actually raises money when you play in Facebook. You can spend money for different things. That money goes into an account that the Tides Foundation manages. We, on the back end, on the developer side, tell Tides on a quarterly basis how much each organization gets. So when you talk about levels of complexity on partnership, you really need to think through some of your good intentions, because we had really great intentions, but no actual mechanism, and I'd say probably 3 months out, didn't have a mechanism for how we were going to give this money to these organizations. So I just wanted to kind of share that, because it was really about thinking of, and a lot of the relationships on the partnership side started with individuals. It started with Nick and Cheryl. They started with some of the filmmakers on the broadcast. They're very much personal relationship. Those may or may not be sometimes your best partners in terms of their ability to leverage what you're trying to do. So I just wanted to share that.
Lena, I'd love to hear your input, because you work on both sides, bringing people together.
So in terms of funding, not fundraising, but funding, that could be its whole other panel. Right. So I'm not going to talk about that. In terms of partnerships, what I try to do is bridge that gap, because people are speaking different languages, right? So people on the nonprofit side are speaking a different language than people on the media side, and forget people on the technology side. It's like a whole different, and I find myself translating a lot. So that's number one. Number two is that I like to think about partnerships as there are different levels, as you touched on, right? So there's core partners who are going to be contributing to your platform at a very high level, And you usually do have to actually find a funding source that allows them to dedicate the time to that. So what do I mean? I mean that they're going to be helping you create your platform. If it's going to be a user-centric, sort of community-centric platform, which not all of them are. Some are just plain old media that is being given to partners. But if you're going to be creating a transmedia platform, a multimedia platform that is in service of appropriate action and the people committing to those actions and doing the work, quote unquote, the work, then they have to help you co-design it. So what I do is when I think about the strategy and the design of a platform, I'm engaging my partners at the beginning to help design the platform. So I'm not the one designing the platform alone. It's a community initiative, right? And so that's the work that I've done also with the UN and with the World Bank. How do you start looking at co-creation at the beginning, right? And then you have a secondary level of partners who are sort of either your content partners, your funding partners, your fundraising partners, and they're contributing rather less, and they come in a little bit later, but you engage them. And then you have sort of your PR partners or your publicity partners, the ones who are going to engage their constituencies in the work that you're doing. But it's at the beginning, you have to bring in your core partners to help you design the whole thing.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Do you always create contracts, partnership contracts?
Not always, no. In some cases, it's actually just based on trust, also because the flow then becomes organic, right? You start creating the contracts when there is a joint funding pool, right? So when it comes to actual just plain old design, because there is a little bit of leeway to a certain extent in terms of how much people can give you, and the way we design it is so that it can be lighter touch. Like they're not actually doing our work. I'm not saying that they're doing our work, but they're giving us creative input and content input, and it helps that we come out of human rights already and global development. That's why I don't work on other issues as much, because I have a content expertise, quote unquote, whatever. So if I were to work on education reform, I'd have to bring in a whole other set of people, for example.
So two words that we talk a lot about in the media space are mobile and social. And I want to hear a little bit from Kristen in your work with Mama about really the customization and the localization and how important that's been to your success.
Sure, it's absolutely critical. The way in which people use mobile is very dependent on a couple of factors. One is the cultural factor. The barriers to particularly women using mobile phones are often cultural things like husbands not allowing them to. There's, especially in places like India, Bangladesh, there's a high degree of suspicion around why a woman would have a mobile phone and who she would be connecting with on that. There's also technology illiteracy kinds of issues. But the other factor that you have to really look at is what's the price structure for accessing mobile information in any given country. So for example, in South Africa, women are more technologically savvy and also much more functionally literate, but also the data rates are quite inexpensive, and SMS rates are among the highest in the world. So our South Africa program is very focused on a mobile website and women being able to browse the Mobi site via their phones. Bangladesh, for example, SMS and voice rates are much less expensive. Most people have much lower end handsets, and the use of data and mobile websites is far, far lower there. So we have a very simple SMS and voice system there. So if you're going to try to reach people through the mobile platform, you really have to understand from country to country how they use phones, how much the prices are to access the information on their phones, and all of the cultural pieces that come into whether or not they have phones, what the level of phones are, and what the level of both their kind of functional and technological literacy is.
Then let's talk about social, which is a huge bucket, and I think to date has really been thought about as just promoting, getting likers, getting people on board for a message, but something that, I think we're all seeing, and certainly the work for Games for Change, is social is now about action, not just promotion. And can you talk a little bit about what you learned in that regard?
I mean, it's been interesting on Half the Sky, and one of, just in terms of looking at funding and taking kind of getting your content aligned. So I think about Half the Sky, I think about Girl Rising, the 10 times 10 initiative. I don't know if people are familiar with that. That these are projects that were in gestation for an incredibly long time with a huge number of partners. And I think that one of the things that they've been very good at is leveraging their partners to drive different kinds of actions. Because there was a broadcast for Half the Sky, there was an ability to get, there were high profile actresses in the series, again, as kind of a gateway to get people to think about tuning into what was pretty tough subject matter. You had Olivia Wilde, who went to Kenya with Nick, tweeting, and one of the things that was actually quite influential for the broadcast, not at all for the game, because it doesn't kind of relate in the same way, but for the broadcast, talent and influencers talking about things, having pictograms, having the kind of army of people who could keep talking and find authentic conversations that they were genuinely participating in through a common hashtag or whatever it was actually quite successful. So that half the game, we're going to just keep using that. I mean, it was there before launch. We're post-launch. We're at 500,000 people playing the game. It'll just keep going.
That's great.
This might be a good time to talk about the second. Yeah,
that's what I was thinking.
Okay, good. So I'm working on another project called La Music, which is a transmedia platform around an album that's being put together in Haiti with Haitian musicians. It was founded by a man named Zach Niles, who, if anybody ever saw, what's it called? The Sierra Leone Refugee All-Stars. That was a documentary from a while ago, and that turned into a couple of albums, a tour, and then also a studio in Sierra Leone called We Own TV. So that was an entire initiative. Well, Zach is trying to sort of recreate that in Haiti post-earthquake, sort of like from 3 years ago when he was the interim executive director of Sine Institute, and he's now working with them again. And it's creating this initiative, and I'm helping him with the transmedia aspects. And it's a little bit different because it's not built around a film or a book, it's based around an album. So it's almost kind of like Buena Vista Social Club for Haiti, but with a social impact angle, which is looking at the social impact is trying to figure out how we can support the creative economy in Haiti's recovery and sort of and growth, and also how do we start looking at digital tools and social to help bolster the creative economy, and also looking at sort of what social issues, what the musicians in the album are looking at in terms of their own social issues in their communities. Let's look at the first, just a little piece of the first music video that came out of this initiative, if you can cue that up.
Maman voye m'pese café, oh. En arrivant moi sous portail, aïe aïe, yon gendarme arrêté moi. Maman voye m'pese café, oh. En arrivant moi sous portail, yon gendarme arrêté moi. Mes amis,
ça m'a dit la caille, elle m'arrivée.
Oh, eh, ouais.
Ça m'a dit la caille, elle m'arrivée.
Mes amis,
ça m'a dit la caille, elle m'arrivée.
Mes amis,
ça m'a dit la caille, elle m'arrivée.
Papa m'a donné l'argent café, l'eau. Boss de c'est celle de moi qui va faire. Papa me connaît qui quand ça t'est passé. Chaud j'aime comme question de moi pas noter pour café. Papa me gaspiller dans grand chimé. Mes amis, wow.
Ça m'a dit la caille, elle m'arrivée.
Mes amis, wow, lolo.
Ça m'a dit la caille, elle m'arrivée.
Maman m'arrivée.
Ça m'a dit la caille, elle m'arrivée.
Mes amis, wow, lolo.
Ça m'a dit la caille, elle m'arrivée.
tande.
Yon peze café qui baille qu'est cassé. Grand moun me voye m'pa ouais raison pour pas aller. A fou bon ba portail la jouette la compliqué. Jeune âme ne tire bien mes amis c'est pété. Pas jour presque cassé bonne fête maman piqué. C'est lui voye m'pese gaji nan men m'pa vle fâché. Des rosiers qui t'a gardé c'est lui celle qui qu'a témoigné. Mes amis et des brûlés souple. Des rosiers oh,
I hope everyone's feeling inspired by the clips and the stories and what these women, these organizations are doing. So we have a few minutes, just a few minutes for questions. So I think there's a mic that's going to go around if you have a question. Anyone? Great.
Yes, thank you very much. Hi, Michelle. Yeah, so this is to Michelle. I'm not quite sure what, so it's like a Kickstarter, but for donations.
No.
It was very complex for me to,
Okay.
I couldn't grab a hold of it.
It's complicated. So Half the Sky is multi-platform. The Facebook game is, overall, the whole project was about a little less than $1 million. I mean, $1.1 million for marketing, everything. So this is a big project. That's just the Facebook game. We are raising money in the game, so as you go through quests, at the end of a quest, there might be a prompt. You gave books in the quest, would you like to make a donation to this NGO that's one of our partners? That money is collected through the Facebook platform. So Facebook takes in the money, and the bank, if you will, that kind of houses the money is controlled by the Tides Foundation. Don't worry, we're actually going to do a whole, if you go onto our website, we're actually starting to deconstruct this entire process, because I think there's a lot to learn, and because we're a nonprofit, that's the goal, which is to share how was this done. So.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm curious for the, sorry.
Okay, let's take
Curious
this one
for
and then
the,
we'll come
for
to you.
the Haitian Project. Are you looking for filmmakers who have already made films in Haiti to tag to your project?
Yeah, to a
I
certain
know
extent,
some.
yeah. So Zach Niles, the founder of this project, is working with Cine Institute, which I think has just rebranded to the Artist Institute, and we'll be working with students there who are Haitian filmmakers and Haitian musicians to create this content. So it's sort of a local, initiative the entire way. And what we're bringing to the table, to a certain extent, is this facility with digital tools. So we've sort of made a partnership with SoundCloud, working with Spotify. We're not tweeting so much about it. But it's really looking at the digital tools that help carry music and music videos. And there's maybe a web series, again, hopefully made in country with Haitian filmmakers. But if you know of people who are interested in working,
I know Haitian filmmaker who, since the catastrophe, have come back home and made films.
Yeah.
About
Okay.
that. So I'd love to.
So come find me after.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Lena as well. In terms of the project on migration, what came first? Sort of chicken and egg thing. Was it the social media project kicking that off, or was it the filmmakers, or was it Amnesty? How did it all come together?
Yeah, it was so this amalgamation of all of it. The 4 short films, the Amnesty films, came second, but it came through a partnership. So Mark, the director, started thinking about his own work is looking at the clash between people that have and people that don't, and particularly looking at capitalism versus sort of indigenous culture and native culture, and also people on the ground who are struggling because of capitalist structures. And so what he did was he put together a network. It was a social media network 4 years ago, and that's when I became involved. We met through a Skoll Foundation event or something. And he started looking at the question of borders. Like, what do borders do to people? And then particularly looking at the US-Mexico border, because it was right after our 2007 immigration reform effort failed. Right, so sort of looking at that, he's British, he's from London, but sort of looking at that, and then started talking to Gael Garcia Bernal, who's a Mexican actor, activist, artist, and all this came together, and Gael brought through Amnesty to the table, or somebody brought Amnesty to the table, and they realized that these 4 short films would play really beautifully in Central America and Mexico, to start thinking about safe passage, that very particular question. But what we were doing with the social media site and the blog was asking people for their own stories about what borders meant to them. And one story sparked the story that then became Who is Daini Cristal, which is the sort of 90-minute documentary which debuted at Sundance. So it's all sort of a piece, and that's why transmedia is a good sort of unifier to a certain extent. But nothing's ever linear, right? So, but that was sort of the sequence.
Thanks very much. Sounds great.
Are there any other questions? I actually have one more question to end on. So what I'm hearing is that this is a lot of work to get these things done, as all good things are. And you are all working out of places where not only are you working for human rights, and not only are you working across media platforms and technology platforms and local and global borders, but you also have to hustle to get money. So what inspires you to do so every single day?
For me, it's my own kids. I have 2 kids, one who is almost 14 and one who's 10. And when they were quite young, I was very ill for many years, and it had a devastating effect on my family on many, many levels. And so when I look at the devastating effect of the health of a mother that it has across the developing world and families who are living in poverty, it drives me. It really absolutely drives me to do what I can to try to help them get the most information that they can to make the best decisions they possibly can about the health of themselves and their children.
Thank you for sharing, and we're glad you're well now.
I guess coming from independent film, I already felt that so when I met some of the people from Games for Change, I did not grow up playing games. I still don't play games, so games are not something that are native to me. But what I did recognize is that they're native for a lot of other people, and that I'm not the norm, and that a lot of other people are experiencing the kind of media that they'd like to have different kinds of experiences on, quite frankly, and that the medium can be pushed, and that it's a medium that is built around engagement. And so there's ways of mobilizing and activating people, and there were already quite a few funders that were really excited about games, and that sort of led me to think, well, this is kind of interesting. I'm personally a little bit more interested now in moving into a media and social cause area. I don't know anything about games, but I do have some perspective as an outsider that I think is actually quite helpful, because if somebody like Nick Kristof is thinking he wants to make a game and doesn't play games and doesn't know anything about games, that's actually kind of interesting. And I feel like here's somebody who's pushing boundaries, and he has a huge network and huge audience. So how can you get behind helping to bring something like that to life?
It's always a hard question, because somebody asked me once why I'm an activist, and I think it's because I came out of a childhood that was just great. You know, it's just like this really, really wonderful upbringing, and I always wondered why other people couldn't have that. And the more and more I do this work, the more and more I realize that there is a deep, deep divide. I mean, I have to do this work. There's no way I can't do this work, because there's this deep divide and there's bottlenecks. And if I can bring my skills and the skills of my community that I know, sort of like people who are looking at media and social justice and all of these, if I can bring them together, if they can pull me into it, we can sort of move those bottlenecks. There is no rational justification for half of the social problems that we've got at all, right? Because it's just questions of access, questions of flow, questions of decision making. And what people are willing to do to each other. So that's kind of why I do the work.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for being